Hi, I'm Ms. Collier, and today on the Tortilla Cat Files, we're going to talk about spices and the age of exploration. First of all, let's talk about what spices are. For us today, we know what spices are. They're stuff that come from plants, and we use them on our food to make it taste better. We have stuff like cinnamon, we have chili powder, pepper, and there's lots of others, and all of, pardon me, all of these come from some part of the plant. I'm sorry. Bass is complaining about the fact that I have a globe on the floor. It's freaking the cats right out. Cinnamon comes from the bark of the cinnamon tree and it's ground up and used. Chili powder comes from dried chilies, which are then ground up and used as powder. And pepper, black pepper, comes from the peppercorns, which are the seeds of the plant, and they're ground up and used to sprinkle over our food. And it makes the food taste better, and people like food to taste better. Food would be very bland without any salt or pepper or anything like that. Um, Particularly people in Europe didn't have access to a lot of these spices without trading with other people. And mostly the upper class, the more wealthy people had access to these because they were expensive because they come from far away in Europe and there wasn't airplanes to travel very quickly. These were coming on an overland route, which means they traveled overland because there wasn't a direct route, an ocean route to where these spices were obtained. One of the things that they were used for, besides being used in food preparation, was in medicine. Back in the time that we're talking about, the age of exploration happened during the 15th century, which is the 1400s. The medicine believed that there were four different humors, they were called, which was the four different parts of your body that produced your feelings, your emotions, and that affected your health. They believed that your blood was produced by your liver, and it caused you to be courageous, hopeful, and playful. And yellow bile was associated with your spleen. I'm having to read this because this is just so bizarre. Yellow bile is associated with your spleen, and that causes aggressiveness and anger. Black bile was linked to your gallbladder, and it could cause depression and apathy, which means you just don't care about anything. And the brains and the lungs were the I'm sorry, the brains and the lungs were where the phlegm was produced, and that caused you to be apathetic. And we know, and they thought that anytime you had a disease, you had one of these humors was out of balance. And so they'd have to figure out which one and then do something to correct it. And a lot of times, what they would do is they would cut a person's arm right here in their elbow. Thank you, Scout. You're not really helpful there. Thank you. Leave that alone. Cut your arm right there in your elbow and let out some of your blood because that was supposed to balance your humors. And they didn't understand that you have a finite amount of blood. You know, there's only about 9 pints of blood in your body, and it doesn't just instantly regenerate once you let some of it out. It takes a few days. And so they would bleed people and then turn around and bleed them again. And a lot of times this bleeding people actually could cause them to die. Either they let too much blood out and there's not enough to circulate, or we know now that your blood is a major factor in fighting off disease. And so if you're draining the blood out, you're taking your frontline warriors out on the disease fighting. So this caused all sorts of problems. And they believed that spices were used for medicine because your diet had to be balanced. Now, we think of a balanced diet as so much meat, so many vegetables and fruits, and some dairy, and not too many fats, and maybe not too much salt. They thought of a balanced diet in a completely different way. It had to be balanced for these four humors. For instance, a fish, which we would think of as a fairly healthy thing to eat, was considered to be too cold and too moist for them, too wet for them. So it would have to have all these spices on it to counteract all of that so that it would be balanced. They had some strange ideas. Spices were also used to clean the air. They believed that diseases traveled through the air, which we know that some of them do, but it has to have a human component, like you sneeze and then that sneeze carries through the air. But they just believed that disease just lived in the air, and that's how you caught diseases. They didn't understand that diseases could be caught from water being contaminated. They didn't understand that diseases could be caught from mosquitoes. They didn't understand any of that at this point. In fact, they believed that burning particular spices would clean the air and you wouldn't get sick. So you see a lot of those old pictures with the plague doctors, and they have that weird mask on that looks like a bird. I should have gotten a picture of that, but I didn't. But it down in the end of that mask, they would have spices for them to breathe in, and that was supposed to filter the air so they wouldn't get sick while these plague doctors were treating people who had the plague. I was reading a book that takes place in Louisiana just before the Civil War, and it was the fever season because New Orleans has lots of mosquitoes since it's a coastal area, and they didn't understand that yellow fever was transmitted by mosquitoes. They didn't figure that out until much later, and so they believed that they would have to keep all of the doors and windows closed, which might have helped with the mosquitoes. And they believed that they had to burn hooves of cattle. They would chop them up and burn the hooves of the cattle or the horses that were butchered, and mix it with gunpowder so that it would burn, and that would keep the air clean. And what it was actually probably doing was keeping the mosquitoes away, but they had no idea that it was the mosquitoes that were causing this. We classify spices as mostly things that come from plants, but in those days, lots of different things were classified as spices. There were animal products, things that came from beavers, things that came from whales. For instance, there was a product called ambergris, which was something that was scraped out of the whale's intestines when they killed a whale, which was probably undigested food. Ew. And that was burned to prevent people from getting the Black Death or the Black Plague and dying. And also gemstones or semi-precious stones were considered spices. And these would be ground up and added to your food. For instance, people believed that pearls, if you ground up pearls and sprinkled them on your food, it would keep your skin from aging and you would look young forever. It seems really silly. And you had to be a very wealthy person to be able to pull this off. But that kind of thing, that kind of nonsense, they would sprinkle other things on their food, grind them up and sprinkle them on their food. Weirdness. So all of this demand for the spices brought about this problem with there's not enough supply. We can't get the spices. They're very expensive. We want to have more access to this. The middle class people, the middle class was beginning to emerge a little bit later on, and they wanted access, not just the really wealthy people. So countries started looking for ways to find spices. All right, let's talk about where the spices come from. Let's see. Here's my map, my globe. All right, this is Europe up here, okay? There we go. This is Europe right up here. Now, what we're gonna talk about mostly today is Spain, because we know that Spain was a major power during this time period, and they wanted to find a water route to India. India is over here, And, you have to go, you've got between India, you've got to go past Africa. And there's this sea here, the Mediterranean Sea, but then it runs into Asia over here, and there's not a way to get there completely by boat. Got India where there's lots of spices, and then this is Indonesia here, which is just a little further over from sorry, cats ran by, from India. And this is Indonesia, and there's lots of spices that are grown here. In fact, these are called the Spice Islands at this time period. So people were starting to go and hunt for a way to sail a ship around to get to India. Now, this is the time period where a lot of people believe that the earth is flat. Okay. And so they had to be really careful about sailing. So the first one that made a major attempt at this that we know of was in 1488. Bartholomew Diaz sailed from Spain. Here's Spain, and he sailed down the west coast of, yeah, you can't see what I'm showing you, from Spain. He sailed down the coast and around Africa, on the west coast of Africa, until he got down here to the Cape of Good Hope. And he found that you could sail around that without falling off the end of the world. And that's apparently about all that he did. But in 1492, our buddy Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain, and he was going to sail west. He was going to go this way instead. And we know that he sailed west, and he got over here and hit this landmass. He didn't ever actually hit the United States or the North America, but he hit down in this area down here and realized that there's a whole lot more land in here. Yeah, I'm messing with the globe. You're okay. And so he discovered this whole new world, but he did not discover India. But that's why he thought he had landed in India, and that's why he called the people that were there already, the indigenous people, he called them Indians, because he thought he was in India. He was totally nowhere close to India. Okay, and in 1497, Vasco da Gama actually was able to sail around the Cape of Good Hope over here in Africa. He sailed around the Cape of Good Hope and back up and actually made it to India. So he's the first one that actually managed to form this trade route. And in 1512, Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated the globe. He sailed all the way around the world, and he established a route to the Spice Islands. So that's how America, or the United States, what became the United States, North America, South America, that whole land area gets discovered. They weren't looking for more land. They were looking for a way to get these spices, because every time someone would bring spices to England, say from India, you have to have the guy that goes to India and gets it, and then he comes along and he sells it to another guy, and that guy keeps some of it and then sells some of it on, and that guy keeps some of it and sells some of it on. And who knows how many times it has changed hands before it gets to its final end user, the guy that's going to put it on his food and eat it. And every time it gets sold, the amount gets smaller and the price goes up. So they were looking for a way to make these spices more affordable. And that's how come we have the age of exploration. We think of it now as they were exploring and looking for new land, but they weren't. They were looking for spices, and they were looking for ways to get rich. Sadly, these spice wars didn't end with the age of exploration. They continued on. For instance, you have, once these trade routes are established, now you have countries trying to take them over and have like a monopoly, which means they're the only ones that get to travel on these routes, and they're the only ones that get to make money off of them. The Portuguese at this time had the best ships. And so, Portugal is a really small little country. I'm going to show you what Portugal is. I put my map down, my globe down. Portugal is this little country right here, the little green country right here on the edge of Spain. Portugal's not very big, but they had the best ships and they had the best navigators. And so they, for a while, kind of had a pretty close scout, stop that, had a pretty good monopoly on the trade routes for a little while. But Spain had a really good navy. And so they were fighting back and forth, the Spanish and the Portuguese. And then in the 1500s, we had the whole armada. The Spanish armada was defeated by the British Navy. And now the British have the best Navy. And so they take over and start fighting for things. And sadly, these spice wars went on for a very long time because you had countries that would find islands that had nutmeg trees where they could get nutmeg. And they would come in and they would enslave the population. They would kill off a lot of them. And they would enslave the population that was left and start using them to produce nutmeg or cinnamon or whatever spice that was there. And they would take all of that and sell it and make money. And so, a lot of really bad things went on with this exploration. But that's how come the spices were so important. And that's actually what kicks off the whole age of exploration. It wasn't looking for land, it was looking for these spices. Thank you for watching today. If you like this episode, please give me a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel. If you have anything you would like to discuss, please do that in the comments. Thank you very much for joining me.